Hi, and welcome to a special one-off podcast with our good friends of Elevate Your Clinic, Angie Jackson from Angie Jackson Physio. So we're looking forward to delve into a kind of business topic. There's a bit of a clinical element to this, which is unique to our normal podcasts, but we're looking forward to delve into some specifics today, and which is going to be exciting, and hopefully for you, the listener, you'll get some really good insights because Angie's on a real, quite passionate mission, which is why we had to get her on and record this on educating the world, I'm going to say, because I think there's a higher mission that we can achieve by getting this message out on education and prevention of lumbar stress fractures. And we've talked an awful lot, spent an awful lot of time off air and camera talking about this. So I'm really excited to get some of this content down. So Angela, for those people who are unfamiliar with yourself and our listeners, do you want to just give people a bit of a background into yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I've been a physio for over 30 years and took the typical route of getting Angies as a kid and realizing that the only thing I knew anything about other than sport was physio. And I got lucky early on and had an opportunity to work in a kids sports injury clinic over in Toronto. And I kind of fell in love with working with young athletes and not only working on sort of injured athletes, but also then working through to prevention. So I've just recently sold my physio clinic after 29 years. And so, as Andy said, I've become on a bit of a mission to share some of the knowledge that I've acquired. And my particular passion through working with Cheshire Cricket for the last 15 years is just how many kids actually present with low back pain and how many of those turn out to be lumbar stress fractures. So trying to see if we can stop them through education.
And I think that's one of the big things, isn't it? And I know, like, for most of the listeners who are probably therapists out there, you know, this is a lot of your focus is going to be, and I know your focus is around educating therapists, but also coaches and parents, and then also how young athletes can, you know, adapt themselves and prepare themselves for the world of, you know, youth sport and growing and developing and all the things that go around that. And hopefully we're going to be touching on some things towards the end of this where we can give some advice, you know, out there. But I guess as therapists, it's important, isn't it, that we're probably going to see more and more of these coming into a clinical practice setting. You know, and especially in private practice, you know, I don't know many therapists who specialize in peds, you know, so they're not actively recruiting for these kind of conditions, are they?
No, I think there's two angles to that. I think we are blissfully unaware quite often of the different presentations that occur in children. And I think many of us just apply our sort of knowledge of how to treat an adult with back pain or an adult with a sports injury to the childhood market. And so I think the first thing that sort of me as a business owner did was very much try to design some training for whenever a member of staff came to work for PhysioFit. We always tried to help them to understand the presentations that they might see in clinic, because mostly our model's always been attract the mum and dad and they'll hopefully bring granny and the kid. But really our physiotherapy training, particularly in the NHS, doesn't necessarily mean that we see too many young athletes. So I think the key to it all is trying to get some kind of understanding of what sort of presentations we see in young children and how we can manage them.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head about the training element of it. And I think as a business owner, one of the things both myself and Phil are always passionate about is that, you know, often as a business owner and a leader of a business, it's how do you give all the skills to everybody in your organization so they can present that. And I think when we talked before is, you know, I've been very fortunate to work with elite tennis players for a long time. So I got thrown into having to learn the hard way, put it the nicest possible way of going on. You know, I was never taught it, so I had to go on a quick learning to school for myself. But I know in our clinical practice, one of our junior physios, and again, a learning curve as a leader, was I probably hadn't put the time and effort and energy into training him. I did a second opinion with a young tennis player, and actually we discovered very quickly that they had a lumbar stress fracture, which had almost gone misdiagnosed by him because he, exactly what you'd said, he had applied the principles of an adult into an adolescent body. Yeah. And again, he wasn't getting the outcome. And then luckily he had the insight. Things weren't going to plan to bring me in, and we sat down and discussed with the parents. So just out of curiosity, what kind of frequency would these kind of things in a business would like kids present with? What kind of frequency of lower back pain and things?
Yeah, so generally, if you look at the literature, it sort of says that probably around 50% when they've looked at kids presenting into A&E. So about 50% of kids throughout their teenage years will have one or more episodes of back pain. So of those, what they've been able to show across sort of big studies with thousands of kids in it, that around 40% of those children presenting with low back pain will have a lumbar stress fracture. So if it's been enough to take them into like a doctor's surgery, because the system in America where this study was done is slightly different. But fundamentally, those presenting to a medic, 40% of those with low back pain had a stress fracture. But what was really good was that all of them were athletes. So effectively, this is not a condition that ever affects somebody who's not an athlete. Okay. So if you're taking a history of low back pain and the kid's kind of a bit of a sort of couch potato and they love their PlayStation, the probability is they may have a posturally related backache. But that's not what we're talking about. So there's some nice, easy cues that if you take the history, they'll have always had a sudden spike in activity or a new beginning of a season. They'll always be an athlete. And interestingly, they say that predominantly they'll be boys, but I'm not so sure that that's not because the research was done amongst the cricketing population, the soccer population, and the baseball population. Yeah. So is it that girls don't particularly have it, or is it just that boys play more of the sports that are much more associated with it? And is it really underdiagnosed in maybe the gymnastic population and the ballet population, which would then skew the results?
I mean... Those numbers are phenomenal, aren't they?
They're scary.
Yeah, and that's the bit that that blows my head a bit. And you think, because, listeners will know this, and you know this, Angie, that my whole passion is about customer experience. And my worry when we listen to stats like that is, across the private practices throughout the UK and the US and where all our listeners have come from, is that how many of us have potentially missed them. And what kind of experience is that, delivered to that child potentially, and and the unfortunate around sport and what's that created, but also to the parent and the experience we're offering. And this is why I think it's great that your mission is really, really needed, isn't it? Because I think there's a lot of education needed for healthcare practitioners and parents and coaches on how to identify these more and manage these correctly.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it's all snowballed, really. So I've been involved in postgraduate education for pretty much my whole of my career, and I love teaching. But what inevitably happened was, in order to train my own staff, I made up some teaching modules, and kind of everybody who came to work for us went through all of these different teaching modules about pediatric presentations and the differential diagnoses and how you do like a subjective just for a kid. And then that kind of like snowballed into the language around children, and we started realizing that we needed to get this out there and started taking this into schools and trying to raise awareness amongst how you can sort of be the best you can be. So we kind of it sort of snowballed until I eventually put it into a course for therapists, just trying to kind of give them that confidence that they know all the information. It's just that the presentation and the terminology is a little bit different, and the return to sport and some of the programming is just a little bit different. So it's just kind of been one of those things that's escalated, really. But I think certainly as a business owner, one of the things that would worry me now is that we need to make sure our diagnoses are good, because if we miss these, the difference basically is if we can pick these up early, then we're going to probably mean a kid is out from sport for maybe 6 weeks if it's just at a bone bruising stage. If we miss them and we treat them as sort of a posturally related back pain or growing pains or whatever they may get diagnosed as, then effectively that kid will be out for a minimum of 6 months. And unfortunately, the stats show that the probability of them returning to sport as a teenager to the same level is never quite as great if they haven't had the right management.
Wow, that's okay. So listeners, you need to be connecting with Angie Jackson Physio on all the social media platforms very, very soon, because I know there's going to be some good stuff. What, Angie, as a business then, how did it benefit you? You know, having this knowledge and having this, how do you think over, you know, you talked about having your business for 29 years and now exited. How do you think it benefited you having this knowledge and having this service as part of what you offered at PhysioFit?
I think we've been very fortunate in that, because we have always embraced the idea. As I say, our business strategy is totally based around the sort of middle-aged person that's active and trying to get both their generations of parents and kids in. So probably no different to most physio clinics. But what we made a point of trying to do was say that we were also really good at you know, recognizing kids pathology, and therefore we were a very safe place to bring your child for an honest diagnosis. So I think it gave us a whole business stream, and it escalated into the fact that we could do talks in schools, and then almost every kid who then sort of did get an ache and a pain, a Severs, an Osgood Schlatters, or an achy back, they then tended to come to PhysioFit. And then it worked the other way around, that if the kid came, the parents were there going, well, actually, you know what? I've got a really sore knee, Achilles, whatever. I could do with a bit of that too. And then we'd get granny. So whereas I would still say we target the parents, we've had this whole revenue of being able to advertise ourselves as being able to diagnose kids pathology within clubs, schools, and obviously sort of things like my links with Cheshire Cricket, Cheshire Squash, Cheshire Hockey. You know, all of these different sporting bodies have come to us because they know that we actually understand the young athlete possibly better than some other clinics. So for me, it's a great marketing tool.
And I think also, I mean, you know, as a parent myself, I mean, Gordon is only 8 years old, but she's growing into, I think she'll be, well, she can choose whatever athletic thing she wants to be in, but she's very, very active. And I think that the thing is that as kids develop, as a parent, you want the best support for them. You know, and I guess the worrying thing for me when we look at the stats that you were talking about is for many practitioners, and let's be guilty as one many years ago when I was started up my clinical practice, I probably wasn't as hot on this. And like I said, I had to go and learn the hard way when we won the tennis contract. You know, how do you educate a parent if you two are lacked in knowledge? And I think that's the thing. So what the service for me that you can provide as an organization, whereas, you know, you as an organization, how far would people travel to you because of the experience that you've got?
We've got sort of golfers come down from Southport. We've got kids that come over from Wales. We've just been approached by a family in Birmingham. So, I mean, they are coming further and further. But I would say, you know, you don't need to kind of set your net that wide, because that's when we get into some of our more specialist stuff like the lumbar stress fractures. But I think just in terms of the whole pediatric sort of market, you've got so many kids on your doorstep, and especially with coming back now from a year's layoff from competitive sport, your clinics are going to be rammed with little people who've got sort of apophyseally bone growth related injuries, be they stress fractures or sort of more tendon insertions. And they are going to be literally, you know, all over the place for the next few months whilst they get back to sport, having had this massive spike in activity. So I think we need, as physiotherapists, to really, really get hot on understanding what the diagnosis is, making sure we've got that differential diagnosis, that it's not something that's not a bit nasty, and then cracking on with helping these kids get back to doing what they love.
No, certainly. And, you know, and I think it's great what you're doing in the education. Just a little, do you want to give listeners a bit of insight on kind of what you're creating? I know it's in the development stages, but I think, you know, we've kind of teased people a little bit of what you're doing. So are you able to share a little bit of what you're developing and coming soon?
Yeah, usually conversations with you and Phil change it to a whole new level. So I would say to everybody that what I thought was happening probably a month ago has evolved into something a little bit bigger and bigger. So they honestly are encouraging me to not sort of set any limits. So I'm quite excited. It's how I approach my athletes, with not giving them any limits to their potential. So I suspect that that's what Phil and Andy are doing with me at the minute. But so I've had a course for physiotherapists predominantly, although we get quite a lot of osteopaths and PTs wanting to come on it as well. So it's open to all the therapy world and the athletic world. And so what we've always done is had that as a face-to-face course, and been kind of limited, I guess, to only being able to have 16 on it per venue. And then obviously COVID came along, and I had to start thinking quickly for those courses that I had planned, how could I deliver them? So we put the course online, and you know, a lot of the videos and things are a little bit amateurish because it had to be done really quite quickly. So my project at the moment is very much to really, really revamp the whole athlete development course that we have. And then there's going to be lots of different modules associated with that for therapists, along the lines of how to diagnose and then manage and rehabilitate, fully return to sports safely, a lumbar stress fracture. And there'll be other sort of bits about relative energy deficiency and underfueling in kids, which I think is a massive, massive issue, and something that we're really not really recognizing in the stress fracture world, how young these kids go. So lots of sort of things for therapists. And then the key thing I'm looking at the moment is I've just built, and it's about to go live hopefully in the next week, is I think unless we get to making sure that the parents and the coaches understand when these kids have got lumbar stress fractures or the risk of lumbar stress fractures, is we need to get out there and educate the athletes about how much load they should be doing and the importance of recovery. And then I think we need to target the parents and the coaches. So big lumbar stress fracture coaching module coming out for the cricket coaches in the next week. And then from there, we'll probably spread that out over different sports and different avenues.
I mean, one of the things that excites me about this is, you know, we share this massive passion for the full, complete journey of looking after any athlete or, you know, any patient, any client, any customer. It doesn't matter if they're an 80-year-old that just wants to be able to lift their heavy bags and do shopping after an incident of lower back pain, or it is, you know, an elite tennis player or cricketer or golfer that, you know, is a child, you know, 14-year-old adolescent growing. You know, we want to be able to do the thing. And I think what I love about your approach, which I think is going to be phenomenal for therapists listening that are wanting to either add that kind of pediatric youth to their thing, or they know that mum and dad are asking them to see the kids and they're avoiding it because they're a bit fearful because they're not used to doing them. I think what's brilliant about what you is that start to finish approach, isn't it? Because there's loads of stuff on how to diagnose if you want to, well, read the literature, which, let's be hands up, most of us don't really want to be spending time and effort and energy doing. So it's great that you've done it all for us and then provide it into a nice presentation. That helps us an awful lot because we're all time poor, aren't we? Obviously, running our businesses. So it's great that you've done that. But then also that structured rehabilitation approach and what is return to sport. I think that's another interesting fact. It's a question that I know clinically we get asked a lot by coaches and by parents of going, well, when can they go back? There's this almost bit of pressure, you know. We share our work in golf, don't we? We both share a lot of our, you know, and it's a question of, well, how many balls can they hit? You know, so understanding those measures, if you're not familiar with that, I think that's lovely in that whole approach from start to finish. So any therapist that's looking to either enhance their knowledge or enhance their skills or enhance even an opportunity for bringing different kinds of customers into their business, what you've developed is this whole diagnosis, rehabilitation, and the return to sport measures, which for me is something which is not done an awful lot and not done very, very well. So I think that's why for me it's really, really exciting what you've created and developed.
Thanks, Andy. I think the bit to me that probably a lot of therapists, when I get feedback around the material that I teach on, is the detail of the return to sport. So I have great fun because not all, I mean, obviously I have some sports that I'm really, really familiar with. But then we took on a little water skier who's the British water skiing champion for her age group. Right. And I didn't know the first thing about water skiing. So I think one of the fun bits is you can really, really delve into, well, what does this kid need to do? And I think that's something across physiotherapists where even if it's not an athlete, even if it's, you know, what does granny want to do after her knee replacement? Well, does she play does she go Crown Green bowling, or does she do 6 hours in the garden? What are the demands on her life? And I think if we can really get into what is it that you want to do after this, what's your dreams, what's your aspirations, how much time are you prepared to commit to this in order to achieve that goal? So I spend lots of time talking to them about, like, I'm very much that little toddler that keeps going, why? And, why do you want to do this? What, and really understand what's going to drive them to commit to that exercise program that, when we all, like, if we're really honest, isn't very exciting. And so it takes a massive amount of commitment to either get back after surgery or to get back after one of these lumbar stress fractures, and then be the best you can be. So for me, it's all about really understanding what makes the person tick, and then understanding exactly what those demands of competition might look like. Is it that your golfer, Andy, plays 4 days back to back, plus a practice day, plus maybe a pro-am, and suddenly have they actually trained to do 6 days worth of golf swings? So it's not about how many they can do just on the one day. It's about, can you do it 6 days running?
And I think that's, again, where the education of what you're doing with the prevention is actually understanding the load that these kids are putting through their body, and maybe parents understanding the loads, because we do see kids sometimes as being robust. The joke I always see with lots of dads is going, don't know what you're on about. You're only 8. You should be fine. I'm 40 and got arthritis, but actually we've got to understand that in developing bodies, this load still isn't appropriate to manage as well as it is in adults and professional athletes, isn't it?
I think it's probably more so, if I'm honest, because I think we underestimate, so if you look in terms of, let's say you just take the idea of not creating enough nutrition for the sport you play, then if you're in a growth spurt and you need more calories just to literally play the amount of sport that you do during that growth spurt, it's obviously going to be, higher and higher. If we don't get that right, then basically if the kid either, stops having periods, or they lose bone density, none of that's basically reversible. So, if we don't get this right, you can end up with fertility issues, you can end up with long-term osteoporosis, and they're now starting to link these kids who are under fueling to maybe the cardiac risk in the young, which I think is really, really scary. But the lovely message is, if we just take the time to ask the questions, are they fueling properly for the amount they sport they do? How many recovery days do they have? How many different sports are they doing on any one day? Because my record so far is 21 separate units of sport in a week for one kid.
Wow.
That's a lot. Even your little one doesn't do that many, Andy.
No, she'd have to have a good lie down after that. No, that's
She would. But I mean, imagine how much fuel you need. If the average kid takes 3,000 calories just to grow and do like one sporting activity, how many calories do you need to put into that kid to keep them healthy?
And this is all stuff that you'd provide. So with the kind of education and training that you're doing, this is all the information that therapists, it's all in there, is it?
Yeah, so for the therapist, it's all in there as a module about how do you assess how many calories a kid needs, and then where are they going to get those calories from, and all the sneaky tricks. And I think probably when people talk to me about why am I so passionate about what I'm doing, it's not only off the back of being a physiotherapist. Both my kids have represented their country at sport. And so I've been on a massive journey with them, the highs and lows of becoming elite athletes. But also it's meant that I've been exposed to a lot of national governing body stuff that they've been on a journey with. And I guess they're my guinea pigs. And so I've been able to test the recipe for success for a long time. They're both still alive and kicking. They still all have 4 limbs, quite battered and bruised at times, but effectively I've been exceptionally privileged to watch them grow up and be able to witness how powerful the right education and the right information is. And the fact that they're both now done sports science degrees, and they're both taking that message forward. They both love it and they want to be involved in it in their own worlds.
No, it's fantastic. And I quite like, what I love about this. And I think, we started off the conversation because, we've got this, I know you've got this mission to educate, and, I've got this being my bonnet to help support and get the message out with you, because I think it's so massive what you're trying to do. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really good cause. And I also think that what I like about what you're developing and you're doing, and I think as a therapist it's great, is that you're developing resources for the parent. Because again, like you said, you were actually a parent who understood these things, weren't you? So you've got two elite children, and you actually understood this, and you could be part of that management process. But, you know, I think we were talking about the other day, imagine if I was, you know, if I was a parent, I was an accountant, and I didn't have all this anatomical and physiological knowledge to apply to this. You are kind of being led, aren't you, by the therapists and the physios and the people around you. So I think it's important that there's those educational resources out there for parents and coaches alike.
I think that's the key to it. I mean, at the end of the day, let's just say we take the lumbar stress fracture as a diagnosis, which is obviously a very small part of the pediatric sports world. But for me, it's one of those injuries that's preventable. And therefore, the only way we're going to actually make any inroads on this, and if we think of all the apophyseal injuries and the fact that they're linked to sort of too much too soon and too little recovery, we just want to get the message out there to every single school teacher, every single coach, every single parent, and the kids, to empower them. But parents actually really, really want to do the right thing. Yeah. They just don't have the tools to do it. So kind of one of my main missions is to try and make sure we get to as many parents as we can to say, look, this is the recipe for successful athlete development. You need to do X, Y, and Z. And we usually kind of, with the kids, we usually say, right, there's 10 things I've taught you about today. If you can do each of those 1% better, you're going to be 10% better at sport. And what's even better is the opposition don't know about it. Yeah. So they kind of get really excited about what they can do. And we make all our athletes have an athlete diary to track what they're doing, but also to reflect on what they've been doing. And then with the parents, we give them a very much a calendar to basically plan for the year so that they can work out where we're going to get the rest periods, how we're going to do a bit of tapering before big events, where's the bottlenecks with exams. So I think it's kind of with kids, it's so multifactorial that the pressures are that they still play several sports. They're probably in a music, something or other. Yeah. And then unfortunately, they have those nasty things called exams.
Never my favorite then.
Me neither.
But yeah, the sport bit I was all right with, but there's pesky exams were never my favorite.
I think my report card read, I wish she applied as much in the classroom as she does on the sports field.
Yeah, well, we're on a public thing, so I can't read my report card out. But it was just that look that you got, the shaking of the head when your mum read it. I got there in the end, though. That's all that matters. But I think it's really, I mean, for me, and this is why I would want all therapists listening to help get behind Angie on this. I think it's something which it's certainly something when I looked at the statistics and were listening to your statistics was worrying. And the fact that, especially on the lumbar stress fractures thing, to know that it's preventable if we're educating people well enough, I think it's important. And so, you know, for me, I think therapists, those of you listening who are kind of resonate with lots of these things, or you've got children yourself who are active, you know, educating yourselves is one thing, but then also supporting and sharing this, getting Angie's mission out to as many parents as possible and coaches as possible. I know that's something which I'm very much on. I've jumped on the bandwagon on and trying to get this message out as far as possible. So just a bit of a pitch here then, Angie. So if anyone listening would like to get in contact with yourself, I know we've got some stuff coming soon. So how would people start following you so they can learn more about you or learn more about your mission?
Sure. So my newly formed sort of Twitter feeds and Instagram is Angie, A-N-G-I-E. So Angie, at Angie J Physio. I'm not even learning it yet. So at Angie J Physio. And then my website is angelajacksonphysio.com. So, you know, feel free to reach out to me, see how I'm getting involved in these different projects and how you might be able to help. And then we'll be hopefully launching all the courses over the next few weeks and should have some more information.
No, absolutely fantastic. And I think it's, you know, hopefully we're going to be getting you back on and sharing the success of it and how it's going down. We'd love to listen to listeners. If you always contact us, we can always put you in touch with Angie, so you can get that easy, info@elevateyourclinic.com. And we'll be putting the details on this with the podcast anyway, so we can share. Angie, is there anything else that you want to kind of share with the listeners of, you know, about your mission?
Yeah, I think the kind of like my key sort of statement, I suppose, is that any child who presents with low back pain for more than 2 weeks, if they're an athlete, should be assumed to have a stress fracture until proven otherwise. And that way, then we can't make the mistakes. If we can stop these at the bone bruising, we're talking 6 weeks out. If we miss these and they go on to become a full stress fracture, then effectively they could end up being out for 6 months, and it could end up, instead of just being single-sided, both sides, and a lot more serious.
Wow. I mean, so if that doesn't get you involved, then I don't know what is. So let's go on this mission together. Therapists out there, please do get in touch with Angie. I know she'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to watching this progress and develop, and let's hope we can all work together worldwide and make a real impact on prevention of lumbar stress fractures and helping therapists with their pediatric and their kids support. So Angie, thanks ever so much for your time.
Thank you very much for asking me.
It's been lovely to speak to you again. And guys, if you've got any questions for Angie you want to send to us, then feel free. We'll forward them on. And if there's any other topics that you want regarding what Angie's talking about, please let us know. And I'm sure we can kind of squeeze her in again. Don't you worry about it. All right. Thanks for listening, and thanks for having us.
Thank you.